This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Afghan protests spread in early challenge to the Taliban. Violence between herders and fishermen in Cameroon kills at least 32. And the EU says import of J&J vaccines from South Africa is temporary. Hello and welcome to Africa Live, only on CGTN. I'm Mahia Mututa live in Nairobi. Ramanyang joins me now in studio with your business headlines.
Thank you very much, Mahia. Here's what's coming up in the course of the hour. Zambia's election euphoria fuels the Kwacha's world-beating streak. A Nigeria's state-owned telecommunications provider regulator is recording a 400% increase in revenue from spectrum fees. We'll have the details on those stories and plenty more coming your way in the course of the hour. For now, let's start with the latest in current affairs with Mahia.
Rama, thank you. We begin the top of the hour with Afghanistan, where the US president is defending his decision to pull out of the country, saying the Taliban must decide if they want international recognition. But in an interview that aired Thursday, Joe Biden admitted he thought the group had not changed its fundamental beliefs, and he expressed concerns over the treatment of women. Meanwhile, protesters returned to the street for a second day in several cities to rally against the Taliban. Witnesses say several people were killed in the eastern city of Asadabad. But it's unclear if they were victims of shots fired by Taliban fighters or from a stampede. Hundreds marched in Kabul before Taliban fighters broke up the demonstrations. There were reports of crowds tearing down the white flag of the Taliban. Meanwhile, Russia says it's ready to return to peace talks on Afghanistan. Moscow is advocating a transitional power-sharing government to ease tensions. Now, with reports of violence erupting in the capital earlier, we heard gunshots during our live conversation with Afghan journalist Zmarialai Abbasin in Kabul.
While there was an Independence Day and no incident, no clash between the protesters who were holding Afghanistan national flag and the Taliban has reported yet. But there were youth holding the national tricolor flag in several parts of Kabul city, eastern Nangarhar, Kunar and other provinces, and some reports are given about some clashes which had no casualties. At the moment, some said there are casualties, but unfortunately, we cannot confirm this because as we see the scene now, unfortunately, a lot of incidents, lot of news issues, but it's like as if the camera is already blinded and we can not report from a lot of areas in the country. That makes everybody concerned. At the same time, the catastrophe in Kabul airport erupted again, and again there are casualties. I was watching videos and friends were telling me the stories from in the corner of the Kabul airport. There were direct shots even on those who were evacuees, and every minute there are shootings, and still it's happening, which I don't know what is going on, and most people don't understand. It's much closer to me now, but it's non-stoppable. The shootings continue every minute. You can hear it at the moment.
So we are hearing what appears to be gunshots in the background. Yes. Can you tell us a bit more about it? What are you assuming it's happening there?
I don't know because shooting, it's continued shooting. I don't know if the Taliban are stopping someone or anything, but there are a lot of bullets now in pockets, and they are being shot every minute in Kabul airport and at the same time on the road and street. But at the end, we get no reports since these things have been changed for now 4 days.
Well, the Taliban says it is still in talks for a new inclusive Islamic government. My colleague Tian Wei talked about it with Suhail Shaheen, a spokesperson for the Taliban's political office in Qatar.
You promised, Taliban, to have an inclusive government. Would that mean all factions, all ethnicities, all genders, and also all religion? What kinds of inclusiveness is exactly the description?
Negotiation which is continuing, it is considering all Afghans. All Afghans are considered, but then they will select some personalities which is suitable to be included in the future government. So that is the general framework. So when they are selected, they will be announced to all.
What kinds of selection process will that be? Will people vote?
Right now, it is a vacuum of power. There is no time for any kind of election. There is no constitution. A new constitution will be drafted and then approved. So this needs a lot of work, but that work will be done later. But right now, there is a need to have an Afghan inclusive government. So of course, through talks with these personalities and politicians and deliberation among our top leadership and among ourselves, those persons will be selected.
To Cameroon now, where clashes between herders and fishermen in the north have killed at least 32 people this month. According to the United Nations Refugee Agency, at least 19 villages have been torched. UNHCR also says about 11,000 people have fled to Chad and more than 7,000 people displaced after ethnic fighting broke out in the area on August the 10th. The ethnic violence further complicates security in a region where Cameroon's army has been battling Boko Haram for years and more recently militants linked to Islamic State. Well, let's get more on that story now. We're joined by CGTN's Deji Badmus in Lagos. Deji, ethnic violence in Cameroon is rare, unlike in neighboring Nigeria and Chad. Is this the beginning?
Well, Mahia, I would say it's difficult to tell. And if you ask me, I would say this is more of a clash now over natural resource, if you like, scarce natural resource now, especially in that region. Don't forget, the issue at stake here is water. And it's just incidental that the people, the characters involved now, how this whole thing actually started, that the two individuals involved belong to two different tribes. So this is more or less a clash over access to natural resource than I would say interethnic clash, if you like. It's just that, you know, as I said, you have one tribal or one ethnic group now that are herders and the other ones are fishermen and farmers. So there is a likelihood that this could escalate because we're likely to see more clashes of this nature in the future, especially as, you know, with the effects of global warming and as natural resource continues to get scarce in that region. There's a likelihood that we would see this. And there's also the possibility that we could see a retaliatory attack in the future. It depends on how the government handles this. For now, the government has sent in troops to that area. The government has also banned the movement of motorcycles between the hours of 6 p.m. and 6 a.m. But of course, all of these actions are for the short term. In the long term, the government would need to do more than it is currently doing to prevent a clash of this nature from happening, especially when it has to do with, you know, a fight now over a natural resource like water.
So, Deji, as a result of this, is there then a risk of the violence there undermining the ongoing campaign against Boko Haram in the country's north?
Absolutely. I mean, there's no question about that because the more you have these clashes, the more distracted the military of Cameroon will be. It will obviously undermine their ability to deal with these cross-border issues now, where Boko Haram continues to carry out attacks. So there's no question at all that it would undermine the country's fight against the Boko Haram insurgency because of the actions of these insurgents now from neighboring Nigeria. So it's why the government is doing everything to ensure this does not escalate and that this is peacefully resolved, that there's no a reprisal in the future, and that the issue of scarce resource now is actually addressed. But the fact is that if this is allowed to escalate, there's no question at all that it will distract the Cameroonian military and, of course, effectively undermine their ability to take on Boko Haram and other jihadist groups that are operating around the border area now between Cameroon and Nigeria and even Chad as well.
All right, Digi Badmus in Lagos, Nigeria, thank you very much for speaking to us on Africa Live. Moving on, the European Commission says it has reached a temporary agreement with South Africa to use a plant there to bottle Johnson & Johnson COVID-19 vaccines. Under the deal, South Africa's drug maker Aspen Pharmacare will do the bottling operations of the vaccine substance produced elsewhere. Then it will transfer the finished doses to South Africa and the EU. Reports indicate that around 10 million of the vaccines will be imported into the European Union. The World Health Organization say it was stunned by the news, as the EU already has high vaccination rates while many African countries have administered far fewer jabs. That's even though many countries in the EU have paused the use of the Johnson & Johnson vaccine over health concerns. The EU has promised to donate at least 200 million doses of COVID-19 vaccines to poorer nations, mostly in Africa, by the end of the year. Well, let's get more on that. CGTN's Lucy Hoff is in Brussels and joins us for more. Lucy, this temporary agreement between the EU and South Africa to use a plant there to bottle Johnson & Johnson COVID-19 vaccines has sparked an uproar. What is the agreement all about?
Well, this was an agreement that was signed in light of difficulties at a plant in the United States in terms of the bottling of Johnson & Johnson vaccines that were due to be delivered into the European Union. After difficulties with that plant in the United States, the EU then signed a deal with the Aspen manufacturing company in South Africa in order to bottle up those vaccines, which would then, as you were outlining there, be exported to both South Africa and the EU. Now, the EU is very much saying that this is a temporary arrangement, that from September, the bottling process will shift entirely to Europe. A European Commission spokesperson really downplaying this earlier today, saying that, as I said, this was just a short-term arrangement given those difficulties in the United States. But as you say, there has been uproar about this, given that vaccines being produced in South Africa, which has comparatively very low levels of vaccination compared to EU nations, that it was unable to impose any export restrictions on vaccines being manufactured, at least partly, in the country.
And Lucy, why has there been so much anger as a result of this, and how has the EU then responded to it?
Well, the EU, as I say, very much downplaying this, saying that this is just a short-term temporary arrangement before the bottling process shifts entirely to the EU for those J&J vaccines that are bound for European facilities and countries. So, but there has been outcry. I mean, the WHO's Director General has said he was stunned to find out that vaccines being partly manufactured in South Africa were being exported to the EU, which has high levels of vaccination rates. It has exceeded its targets, given that many vulnerable people in the African Union are still waiting for vaccines. So he has been very critical of this decision. So it does expose how much influence drug makers are having in complex supply chain arrangements. But as I say, the EU very much trying to downplay this, saying that this will just be in place until next month.
All right, Lucy, thank you very much for joining us. CGTN's Lucy Hoff joining us live there from Brussels. Moving on, South Africa will open up COVID-19 vaccinations to those aged between 18 and 35 years of age from Friday. The move comes as the government tries to ramp up its immunization drive. The country has recorded the most coronavirus infections and deaths on the African continent. But it has so far only fully vaccinated less than 8% of its population of 60 million. The South African government has set a target of reaching at least 300,000 COVID-19 vaccinations a day by the end of this month. It also aims to have given at least one dose of COVID-19 vaccines to 35 million of its people by December. Well, CGTN's Angelo Coppola is in Johannesburg and joins us live for more on that. Angelo, what is the latest on South Africa's immunization drive? Well, we don't seem to have Angelo there. We do apologize for that. Moving on, since the outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic in Tunisia in March last year and the start of the national vaccination campaign in March 2020, tens of thousands of volunteers have contributed to the fight against the coronavirus. They are volunteering at more than 400 vaccination centers throughout the country to help advise the population. Adnan Shawashi tells us more.
The Tunisian Red Crescent is one of the most active civil society organizations during the national vaccination effort. The Humanitarian Association has assigned dozens of volunteers to each COVID-19 vaccination center. Iman and her friends are registering and orienting people with or without an appointment.
We are present at all youth centers and schools which have been designated as vaccination centers. The volunteers have been dedicated to this noble task since March. We will continue until the whole population is vaccinated. We help in the organization outside and inside the facility. We register the citizens and accompany them until they are vaccinated and ready to leave the center.
The National Scouting Organization of Tunisia has trained more than 4,000 members who are helping the population. These volunteers are also providing assistance to the health department officials.
I lead a group of scouts who are volunteering to help people aged between 18 to 39 years. For example, here in this center, 15 scouts registered and guided over 3,700 people until they got their COVID-19 vaccine shots.
Thousands of retired medics and paramedics have also joined the vaccination drive. Many Tunisians believe that their considerable effort is one of the main reasons for the success of the open vaccination days.
The conditions and organization are perfect. I did not wait for even 1 minute to get my vaccine shot. I thank all the volunteers for their time, patience and effort, especially the retired health personnel who did not hesitate to save lives and help amid the pandemic.
Tunisian volunteers have distributed food and water to the exhausted medical and paramedical staff. President Qais Said described their role as decisive for the vaccination campaign in the country. The COVID-19 task force announced that the contribution of tens of thousands of volunteers has guaranteed the success of the first and the second walk-in vaccination days, which led to the vaccination of more than 1.1 million citizens in 24 hours. The health department has created an online platform for people wishing to volunteer and to help in the fight against the pandemic. Adnan Shawashi, CGTN, Tunis.
Well, let's take you back to an earlier story where South Africa will open up COVID-19 vaccinations to those aged between 18 and 35 from Friday. The move comes as the government tries to ramp up its immunization drive. Well, let's get you more on that story. CGTN's Angelo Coppola is now standing by for us from Johannesburg. Angelo, what is the latest on the country's immunization drive?
Well, look, the vaccine supply is stable. That's after initial hiccups 5 months ago. The National Coronavirus Command Council says that around 9 million vaccines have been administered in South Africa. 7 million people are partially vaccinated and about 4 million or so are fully vaccinated. That's either with the single jab J&J or the double jab Pfizer vaccine. Some provinces are on top of their game and others are lagging. For example, Limpopo is the best performing province in the country in terms of vaccinations. And the reason for this is that their health department decided to go house to house with educational visits as the best way to teach and to help people make that decision to get vaccinated or not. And it was. Their vaccination data shows a 40% above average vaccination rate compared to all the other provinces. And the worst case province We won't mention any names there, Mahia.
And Angelo, why has the government then taken this decision to open up COVID-19 vaccinations to those between 18 and 35?
Well, look, the bottom line here is the group can now go online from midnight tonight and sign up. They'll get the registration number and a QR code, which they'll then take with them tomorrow morning before walking into a physical vaccinations site. There are hundreds and thousands of them around the country. And this is the biggest age group, and the start date for this group was initially September the 1st, but scenes of empty halls and rooms have forced the authorities to move that date forward by 2 weeks. When I had my jab, the first jab that is, a couple of months, 6 weeks ago now, I was in the queue for close to 3 hours. When I went back for my second jab on Tuesday, it took me less than 20 minutes. And it could have to do with an increase in the number of vaccination sites or simply vaccination fatigue. The need to play catch-up, though, comes as experts predict that a fourth wave may occur in December, about 99 days since the last wave. And if we don't vaccinate around 30 million people by then, we could be in some serious trouble. Mahia?
All right, Angelo, thank you very much for your insights there. CGTN's Angelo Coppola joining us from Johannesburg. Moving on, Nigeria and China will continue to enjoy bilateral cooperation under the Belt and Road Initiative. ABRI seminar has been hosted by the Embassy of China in Nigeria with support from the Nigerian Federal Ministry of Youth and Sports Development. It took place at the China Cultural Center in Abuja. Nigeria has praised China for supporting the nation in the fight against COVID-19. China has donated machine and protective equipment, medical expertise and test kits to Nigeria. Currently, the Chinese vaccine Sinovac is being reviewed by Nigeria's Drug Regulatory Agency, NAFDAC, for approval and use in the country.
The main essence of this BRI is about five connectivity. First is about the policy coordination. The second is about the facility connectivity. The third is about unimpeded trade. The fourth is about financial integration. The last is about people-to-people bond.
The bilateral relations of Nigeria and China has also experienced great growth, ranking Nigeria one among the top 40 trading partners in the world. This is evident with the growth of trade from 1971 to 2017, reaching $19.2 billion US. In view of that, Nigeria has overtaken Angola and South Africa to become China's trading partner and largest export market in Africa.
Well, stay with us here on Africa Live. There's plenty more after this short break.
Africa is a continent of diversity, with varied climates and enchanting geography, and a people so distinct, but with a shared enduring spirit. We are at the heart of the continent to bring you the untold stories.
Let's have a look.
We celebrate Africa as it shapes its own destiny.
Aden, Tunis, Cairo,
Juba,
Johannesburg, Ethiopia,
Tanzania. Africa Live. Find your voice.
Welcome back. Now, residents in an area of Addis Ababa which was hit by torrential rain and severe flooding are still counting their losses. The city administration says 7 people were killed in the Tuesday rains. Authorities have asked residents to take the necessary precautions as heavy rains are still expected in the coming days. Coletta Onjohi visited the site and now reports.
This is for my brother.
It has been days since the flooding. This student at the Mekane Yesus Seminary, Paul Lam, is checking the damage done to his dormitory.
This one is very bad for us. It happened when we were taking exams.
From exam. The dirt level on the wall gives an idea of how high the water rose.
During the water is coming, When the water was coming, we just ran and climbed that way and went up there.
Just we are going up there.
Out in the compound, this building remains submerged in water. Further ahead, these houses tell a story of struggle. Some people reportedly forced their way through up to their roofs. The city administration says 7 others, including a whole family, did not make it out of their houses alive. There's this river that flows right behind the seminary buildings. The residents here tell us that because of the heavy rain, the river overflowed and the water forced itself back into the seminary location. And that's how we had the flooding happening on this other side of the area. Temesgen Mekonnen says he was here on that fateful afternoon.
It is very sad things happened in our compound, which was never happened before. So we are very sad.
Studies have been suspended at the seminary.
It is the top leader management decision. They are now having the meeting today. We are waiting for them. And most students are out. The community who were living here was also out, went out.
Lam and his brother have since moved to another dormitory that wasn't affected by the flooding. Efforts to clear the affected compound has been made tougher by the continuous rain. Forecasters have warned that further heavy rainfall and flooding are likely over the coming days in Addis Ababa, despite nearing the end of the rainy season in the country. Coletta Njohi, CGTN in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia.
Meanwhile, South African President Cyril Ramaphosa has announced that about 10,000 troops will remain on the streets until mid-September. The month-long extension will cost $17 million, and the South African National Defence Force will work with police across the country to prevent and combat crime as well as preserve law and order. Angelo Coppola picks up the story.
Analysts are concerned and are asking questions about the extension and what might have led to the decision to extend the military deployment.
So the initial thinking in my head is that this wouldn't have happened if there wasn't a perceived threat by national government, because bear in mind that this deployment would have been informed by the National Joint Services, which in turn is informed by the police and the State Security Agency, which would lead me to presume, and I think it's not an unreasonable presumption, that there is still this understanding that there is a threat, countrywide, that justifies keeping another, well, it's currently at 10,000, keeping 10,000 troops active in this deployment.
Just what impact did the troop deployment have in the first place? And how are people feeling about soldiers on the streets for another month?
The time army came out, I think they'll be able to stop the whole problem, They stop it, everything stopped, So there's a lot of people. Then they managed to stop the problem when the army came out. But before then, things was going on, nothing's happening, and until when they commanded army to come out, when the soldiers come out, they managed to stop everything.
I think, Joe Public or the average South African will probably be largely okay with it, and I think maybe even welcoming, particularly in the areas of KZN and Gauteng that were hardest hit during the looting and the violence. I think for them there'll be no real problem with having these soldiers around.
The month-long extension is seen by some as a good thing.
Yeah, we feel safe, but not 100%. We feel safe anyway, but we still have that fear, that shock is still there. Yeah, because a lot of people lose a lot of things, a lot of things being burned and the cars and whatever, Yeah, but I believe everything's under control now. Everything's under control now. Government is doing something about it anyway.
Questions are also being asked about the size of the deployment when compared to the 1,400 troops South Africa sent to Mozambique to fight the insurgents there.
This deployment, either the perception or either the threat is real to this country, in which case we as South Africans deserve to know about it and should be informed about it, or it isn't, and we're simply wasting money.
There's no question that the presence of those troops on the streets has helped to quell the violence, the looting and the arson. The question now is what happens when those troops leave? I'm Angelo Coppola for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
To Egypt now, where the government is rushing to build public housing for employees in the country's new administrative capital. The project is one of the most prominent of a series of infrastructure schemes pursued by President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi. CGTN's Noel Makugu reports.
The Egyptian government has been racing against time to build new homes for thousands of middle-level civil servants expected to move to Badr city.
This is the first phase in the housing project for the civil servants of the new administrative capital, which includes 376 buildings and more than 9,000 units. The challenge has been how to finish this large number within the specified time frame while maintaining the quality of the interior finishing. It was difficult, but we solved it because we worked throughout our holidays.
The government turned to private developers to build pricier residential districts within the grandiose new capital. The developers have been designing units for more than 6 million people to live in over 168 square kilometers beyond Cairo's outer reaches. And though the government ministries are largely complete, other areas of the new city and transport links are still under construction.
One of our main missions and what we were trying to achieve before time ran out was not to be an obstacle for the moving process of civil servants to the new capital. We could not have accepted a situation where the president, for example, would order the move in August or October and for us not to be ready by then. And not just the housing, but also full furnishings such as electricity, water, gas, telephone lines. When you enter an apartment, you see that the telephone is working, the internet is working, natural gas is working. Of course, electricity and water are essentials.
Egyptian President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi has already inaugurated 9,024 housing units in the now complete first phase. Another 4,704 units are under construction in the second phase. President al-Sisi says the grand opening later this year will mark the birth of a new nation. Noel Makugu, CGTN.
The Eastern-based parliament in Libya has approved a draft law to oversee the next elections. The unilateral move goes against a United Nations plan to get all Libyan sides to unanimously approve guidelines for the planned December elections. Adel Mahroui tells us more.
The UN Libyan Political Dialogue Forum has for several months now failed to get rival factions to agree on an election law. Driven by fears that Western Libyan powers are trying to marginalize key figures in the East, the Eastern-based parliament has decided to unilaterally issue an election law. This week, it approved a draft that allows government employees and military officers to run for president, while keeping their positions as a safety net if they lose in the polls.
Parliament has a legitimate presence. It reviewed the government budget. It endorsed the government. So I think it will be difficult for the government or elections committee to refuse a law passed by Parliament. The law sets the criteria required for a person to run. What's remarkable about the draft law of Parliament is that it decreased the requirements. Any Libyan can fulfill these simple requirements. That shows they don't want to marginalize anyone.
Furious at this unilateral move, the Western-based High Council of State sent a letter to the UN support mission in Libya warning about the consequences of passing the law. According to the UN-endorsed political agreement, a joint committee that includes the two rival legislative bodies must approve all laws that regulate any voting procedure.
What we are currently objecting to is the unilateral movement to issue the law. But if the Joint Committee convenes to discuss the law as a draft subject to change, we wouldn't mind doing so. To issue it, however, without the consultation of the Council of State, this is absolutely rejected, and we won't allow that law to see the light.
Next week, the Libyan parliament says it will vote on the final draft for the presidential election law. On the other hand, interim Prime Minister Abdulhamid Dbeibeh has voiced his frustrations over those he says are stalling the elections process.
No matter how long it takes, our prime mission is to hold the elections. This will not be a dream, but a reality. No matter what obstacles they throw against that path, they won't make our free and democratic elections stumble. Losers claim they want elections while they have remained in their posts for a decade. They don't want elections, they want to make it a failure.
Western-based politicians have been pushing to ban military officers, dual nationals and former members of the Gaddafi regime from running in the December elections. Eastern-based politicians have been opposing those attempts.
Supporters to the Eastern-based parliament believe it is moving stagnant waters by issuing this election law. But their rivals in the West see it as a violation to the entire peace process agreed upon and is currently supervised by the UN. Now, both parties will not reach any conclusion unless the UN support mission in Libya announces its stance from this move. Adel Mahroui, CGTN, Cairo.
And it's time for the business here on Africa Live. Rama's back with the latest.
Thank you very much, Mahia. Here's what's coming up in business news. Zambia's election euphoria fuels a Kwacha's world-beating streak. And Nigeria's state-owned telecommunications regulators reporting a 400% increase in revenue from spectrum fees.
It's just taken me completely out of my depth, but at the same time it's exciting. It's new, it's different, it's a challenge.
It's really exciting.
Let's start in the world of currencies. Zambia's kwacha continues to extend its gains against the American dollar, effectively making it today the world's best performing currency, at least ever since Hakainde Hichilema was announced as a winner of the August 12 presidential vote. The kwacha is appreciated by nearly 8% this week. 17.92 to the dollar is at the peak at the moment. That's the best performance out of more than 140 different currencies tracked by Bloomberg. It also puts it on track for its strongest close since May 2020. Zambia's $1 billion Eurobond due in 2024 advanced for a fourth consecutive day as well, to the highest level in more than 2 years. It's now priced at just under 76.2 US cents on the dollar. Investors are betting that Mr. Hichilema, who will be sworn in formally on the 24th of August, will be able to not only secure an IMF program, but also the associated $1.3 billion loan that might come with it by the end of April 2022. Africa's largest economy is facing soaring food prices and a surge in inflation. And that's a situation that has been exacerbated by the impact of the pandemic. Even though Nigeria's inflation rate did fall slightly for the fourth consecutive month in July, nearly half of the country's population is facing a serious cash crunch and can barely cope with the high cost of food. CGTN's Phil Ihaza tells us more from Abuja.
Another slow start to business today for this Abuja restaurant owner, Blessing. She says the high cost of food products is affecting her business a great deal.
Customers are complaining because of the increments in price. And the reason why we are selling our food high is because of markets. When we go to market, things are high, the prices there are high. And that's why when you come here, you see small customers. We are not like having much sales.
The latest report by the National Bureau of Statistics signals that food prices continue to rise in July, though at a slower rate than in June. The Consumer Price Index, which measures the rate of change in prices of goods and services for the month of July, dropped to 17.38% from 17.75% in June. In spite of the marginal drop, inflation is still a huge burden on over 80 million Nigerians who live below the $1.90 a day, according to the World Poverty Clock.
The hardest impact is on the poor and excluded, because for many poor people, they spend a high percentage of their disposable income on food, health, and education. And so when inflation takes place, and then the cost of food increases and basic services increases, people are not able to cope, and many people slip into poverty and destitution.
The country's economy slipped into recession last year due to a pandemic lockdown, but it bounced back in February this year. The government tried to tackle inflation and the hike in food prices, but experts say it's a task that is beyond the government alone.
It will require efforts from government, from private sector, and for individuals. For every economy, what makes it solid is the production of goods and services. So for that to happen, government will need to scale up in terms of service delivery, starting from budgetary provisions. There are 4 key sectors that if government put more money, it will have direct impact on the life of citizens: infrastructure, agriculture, education, and health.
The Central Bank of Nigeria says it's determined to fix the problem of inflation.
The CBN Governor Godwin Emefiele says the launch of various intervention programs such as investing in agriculture and granting low-interest loans to farmers should ensure the rapid growth of the nation's economy and a lower inflation rate soon.
That could help wipe away the frustrations of millions of people like Blessing and keep them in business. How long that might take is hard to tell. Phil Ihaza, CGTN, Abuja.
Tunisia may be in the middle of a deep economic crisis, but the North African state is still servicing its international debt. $503.5 million of debt raised in 2016 has been repaid. That comes in the wake of another $500 million payment made in late July. That covered debt raised back in 2014. Now, from the start of January 2020, effectively around the same time the COVID pandemic was starting to spread around the world, to date, the Tunisian dinar has lost less than 0.1% of its value against the American dollar. Here's CGTN's Adin Chouachi with the details.
The Central Bank of Tunisia announced that the country's net foreign exchange reserves fell to $6.84 billion, or 120 days of import on August 5th, from $7.3 billion, which corresponds to 129 days at the end of July. Analysts warned that the settlement of US bonds has had a disastrous impact on the economy.
We know also that these 2 loans have been paid in a very bad way, financially and economically speaking, of course, because the state didn't have the money, and the state had to issue very short-term treasury bills for 3 months only, and the treasury bills were subscribed by the Tunisian banks but bought back the same day by the Central Bank of Tunisia, which meant that the loans have been paid through the creation of currency, which is extremely dangerous for the general balances and equilibriums in the Tunisian economy.
The executive board of the Apex Bank said the lower mobilization of foreign exchange resources in the form of loans and foreign investments have also impacted the foreign balance of payment, bringing down net foreign exchange reserves.
I think what we need is a minimum of $3 to $5 billion needed immediately to start to build the trust again with the international financial market and reassure the market that the Tunisian debt remaining until the end of the year at least will be paid normally and not with a recourse to issuing currency like we did on July 23 and August 5.
Authorities in Tunis are encouraging the country's diaspora to increase remittances in 2021. The central bank governor said these remittances accounted for 32% of Tunisia's foreign exchange reserves in 2019.
Tunisian diaspora remittances are important for the national economy, but there are many obstacles like the exchange rate and the lack of digitalization of some Tunisian banks. Only 22% of our diaspora abroad are interested in investing at home due to a lack of political clarity of the situation in the country and a lack of visibility on investment opportunities.
According to the 2021 state budget, debt services have been impacted by the exchange rate of the Tunisian dinar against the main currencies. Euro-denominated loans represents 54.9% of Tunisian debt, followed by the dollar, which account for 22.3%. According to the Finance Department and Tunisia's Apex Bank, the interest on public debt that will be repaid in 2021 amounts to approximately $1.5 billion. It is down 2.2% compared to 2020. Adnan Shawishi, CGTN, Tunis.
Officials in China are looking to improve bilateral trade and investment ties with economies in the Arab world. Official data does show that China is the leading trade partner of many an Arab country, while the latter tend to be China's largest overseas crude oil suppliers. Back in 2020, for example, bilateral trade between the two sides was worth about $240 billion. Despite the pandemic, China's exports to those economies exceeded $120 billion last year, up 2% compared to 2019. Electromechanical equipment and high-tech products accounted for about 67% of total exports last year. On the investment side, China's direct investments in Arab countries reached over $20 billion by the end of 2020. Arab countries, on the other hand, had invested a total of $3.8 billion in China. Two-way investment mainly covered oil and gas, construction, manufacturing, logistics and power. I'll leave you there for the time being, but I'll be back at the top of the hour. In global business, we'll be heading over to Johannesburg. South African Airways, as we understand it, is relatively close to sealing a deal with its chosen strategic equity partner, Takatsu Consortium. Ideally, that deal should see the airline back in the skies relatively soon. The regulatory authority in the country has already issued an air operator certificate for the carrier for its domestic and international flights, ahead of an expected relaunch either later this month or in early September. But where are the fine details of this deal? We'll explore that live from Johannesburg at 1800 GMT. See you then. For now, back to Mahia.
Rama, thank you. Well, still to come here on The Sport. Cameroonians have their say following Tuesday's draw for the Africa Cup of Nations.
The greatest journeys, the greatest sights, the greatest adventures.
Here in Kanater, this weir allows the locals to walk on water.
We're far more than just TV news. We're your passport to the wonders of Africa.
To bring you stories of struggle, survival and hope.
So let's explore. CGTN. See the difference. How would you create your legend? On the fields, on the tracks, in the arenas of Africa. Were you born to be a player? Could this moment be yours? Sports Scene. Find your game.
Welcome to The Sport. Now, Abdulaziz Kunert was just 15 when he was sentenced to 12 years in prison